I'm Kay, and welcome to Kay's Recipes for Disaster here on the Ruby Tuesday. In today's episode, I'm going to be showing you how to do a jigsaw blade stuck in the head and a wound with some glass sticking out of it. We recently had the opportunity to join Lionsgate as they were having a party to celebrate the release of their Blu-ray of Jigsaw, the last in the movie franchise, and we were able to do these two special effects on a lot of their guests, so it was lovely to get a little bit of blood and gore around the place. And we also did the Billy puppet mask, which I will show you how to do in a separate video. So let's get started.
So here's what you're going to need. You're going to need some paint. I used poster paint in black, brown and orange, and a paintbrush that you don't mind getting a bit mucky because you're going to be dabbing the paint, not painting smoothly. I used a template just to cut out on a piece of cardboard my shape for my jigsaw blade, and I started with grey cardboard because I thought it would give a bit of a better finish in terms of it being metal underneath. So you cut it out, and what you eventually want it to look like is that. So then you have to cut the sort of saw blade teeth into it, and then it looks like that, like magic. And then you're going to need to use a little bit of newspaper just to protect your surface, and grab your paint and your cardboard. And I started with the black paint. So you get a little bit of the black paint onto the end of your paintbrush and then just dab it around the plate or whatever you're using to put the paint on, so that you don't have too much on your paintbrush, and you just sort of splodge it around in a fairly random pattern, and then grab some of your brown, again dab it off on the plate so you don't have too much on your brush, and then splodge it around. You want to make the pattern pretty random, and you don't mind if the paints start to mix because it gives it a much more sort of rusty, realistic looking impression. So yeah, just keep on dabbing and twisting and splodging until you're happy with what you've got, and then you're going to use your orange paint just as a bit of sort of oxidized rust. And don't worry if it comes out pretty bright when you paint it on. I was using poster paint, so they're always much brighter when they're wet, and when they dry they go quite dull, well, much duller. So don't worry if it doesn't look too realistic when you first paint it on. So you let that dry on the first side, then flip it over, and then you'll have your paint on both sides. Okay, once your saw blade is fully dry, you can take your model and decide where you're going to put it. As you can see, I'm deciding to put it on the head, and of course heads are round, not flat, so you'll have to cut it out and then just keep sort of cutting it until you're happy with the shape of it, so that it fits quite snugly against your model's face or arm or wherever you choose to put it. It's a good idea just to mark the beginning and end point. And if you press it down onto the skin, it'll leave a little bit of an indentation that helps you as a guideline for when you put on your spirit gum, which is a skin adhesive. You can put all sorts of things on with that, like sparkly rhinestones and various other bits and pieces. One thing to remember with spirit gum adhesive is that it's quite difficult to get off. It goes on really easy, but it doesn't come off very easily. Whatever you've put on, the prosthetic will come off fairly easily, but the glue itself tends to really stick to your face. So I'll tell you in a minute how to get that off. You need to tap it to activate it. So just tap it with the back of a makeup brush. You can use your finger, but then you'll get a sticky finger. So use the back of a brush and just tap it until it gets tacky. And you really do need to do this step, otherwise it just won't stick. So you'll know when it's starting to get ready to use because it'll start getting really sticky. I put some on the saw blade as well, so I'm just giving that a little tap and then I'll stick the two together. So as I was saying about how to get spirit gum adhesive off your skin, they do recommend that you use a spirit gum remover. I've tried using that. I found that it irritated my skin, so I didn't like using it, and actually olive oil or coconut oil worked brilliantly to take it off. So if you have sensitive skin, you can opt for olive oil or coconut oil to get the spirit gum adhesive off when you're finished. So leave that for a few seconds just to make sure that it's fully set and it's fully stuck. Then I'm using a mirin bruise wheel, just using the brown colour, just to, well, you don't even need to use this step depending on how thick your blood is. You can sort of outline the edges and maybe extend the edge slightly so it looks like it's not just been placed on the head, it's sort of spun into the head, if that makes more sense. I realised halfway through that I was using the wrong brush, and these things happen. But anyway, you don't necessarily have to do this step depending on how thick your blood is. If it's really thick, it's going to cover up this line anyway, so that's what I opted to do. I'm using the mirin coagulated gel blood, which is really good, but what I didn't do, and it's a big no-no, is I didn't test it under this light with this camera. So as you can see, it's coming out really red and not very realistic looking on camera. In the natural light, it actually looked really good. So it's always important to do a camera test and just make sure that the product that you're using is matching with the lighting. And there you have it, Sawblade in the head. So moving on to the next one. I'm using a little bit of mirin sin wax, which is a synthetic wax. You just roll it around in your fingers until it gets soft enough. Make a sausage shape and stick it where you want to make your cut. I was finding it quite tricky I do find this wax quite tricky to work with. It's always handy to have some Vaseline because the wax is super sticky and it tends to stick to you rather than to your model, which is not so good. So I tend to use the back of a makeup brush that's covered in Vaseline just to get it really stuck down onto the model, just to start it off, and then I'll switch to using my fingers just to smooth it onto the skin so that you have no edges, because that really helps it to look like it's actually part of the skin rather than just a blob of wax that you've stuck on somebody's face. Wax can also be a little bit of a pain to get off, so just again, you can scrape most of it off either with a spatula or a spoon or with your fingernails when you're done with your effect, and then just remove the last of the residue with a little bit of olive oil. I tell you what, olive oil is great. It's good for the skin too. Now I'm just using a cocktail stick with a little bit of Vaseline on it just to create an incision. Just be careful when using a cocktail stick that you do it at an angle so that you're not actually poking your model, because they won't like that. When you're happy with the shape that you've created, you can take your bruise wheel again. I'm using the brown because I just like to start with a dark colour and put a nice dark colour in the middle of the incision. I'm going to cover it up with blood, but I find it's quite nice to have this dark base to start with. Also, don't forget to extend your lines out. It just makes it look a bit more realistic. Now, for the fake glass, I'm actually using uncooked prawn crackers. I know, just whatever you have lying around the house. So I've broken them up into little pieces, and I've chosen a couple of pieces, and I'm just placing them there so I know that they'll fit and that's where I want to put them. And then I'm going to use my trusty spirit gum adhesive just to stick them in place. And don't forget to tap, tap, tap to activate your spirit gum adhesive so that it's nice and sticky before you put your glass in. And then just pop the glass in, and you'll need to press it in a little, quite firmly, but obviously just check that you're not hurting your model. And don't go in with a sharp edge because they won't like that. You might end up with a real cut. So yeah, just give it a good press and make sure that it's nice and set. Now you can use your bruise wheel. I'm using the bloody rose colour just to make a little bit of irritation around the edge of the cut, And as you'll notice, my first dab created a straight line, and you really don't want that. So if you're using a homemade stippling sponge like I was, just check that you don't have any straight lines on it, because it ruins the effect completely by having a nice straight line, because you wouldn't get that naturally. And then some coagulated blood in and around the wound, just to finish off the effect. It is super simple. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of how-to with a saw blade and some glass in the face. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.